Hi, I'm Jon Vernon here today to talk about discipline and how to handle terminations if a employment situation ever comes to that. Obviously, this is one of the most sensitive areas that management has to deal with, and it's definitely an area where they often need to seek the guidance of human resources to help guide them through this process to make sure that everything that they do not only is fair to the employee, but also and equally as important, maybe more important, is that if there's ever any litigation, that the process it was followed through essentially due process, and all the right steps were taken. Um, and it is a definitely a situation where management and HR have to be cohesive together and on the same page. And so with that, there are several things that management needs to know and to lean on HR for when it comes to going through this very sensitive process. First of all, it would behoove management to make sure that before it ever gets to the point of having to do termination, that all the proper steps were followed. This would include a improvement plan. If there's a gap between the expectations of the employer and the employee, and that should be well documented. That process should be, and again, it's a type of thing where in the past things like terms like reprimand or warning or a formal informal type meeting can create a sense of anxiety for the employee. It needs to be more of a process of, hey, this is what the expectations are. This is where you are now. What can we do to help you close this gap and become the employee that we hired you to be, and we've always expected you to know that you can be. So that's first and foremost before you ever get into the more difficult parts. However, for whatever reasons, when you hire an employee, you always expect the best, and sometimes things just don't work out. It could be personal issues with the employee. It may be the skills that you thought they had. Maybe they're just lacking in those, and it's just not going to be a good fit. So it comes to that point where you do have to have that discussion. And just as I said earlier, you want to make sure that everything has been documented. I know as an employee with Paulding County Schools, that we often have at the beginning of each year, there's several types of documentation we have to sign off on, like a code of conduct, how to handle technology, appropriate relationships on social media, all these types of things. And we sign those. And so it is clear what the expectation was. And so if those are ever violated, the employer can always come back and say, well, look, you signed this, you saw it, you read it, and you understood it. And so that could always be an important thing to do for employees when they are hired on, is to make sure they assign appropriate documentation. Um, then after the process of verifying what the expectations were, verifying that the expectations were not met, you have to provide evidence that the expectations were not met. And from that point forward, you're either moving with a signed improvement plan, and these are what we need to do in the future, or if it's a point where you are at termination, then the manager, if it's that discussion, then you need to have a clear and concise a plan of action. You need to have your documentation ready. You don't need to beat around the bush. You need to be straightforward with the employee. You don't need to rehash everything that you've already covered in previous meetings where you were talking about improvement of performance. It's essentially we've gotten to this point. The improvement hasn't been there. We just don't think this is a good fit. And in SHRM, they used a term called separating our employment, which is a better than, I think comes across a little bit better than we're letting you go, or certainly that we're firing you. There are other points that management also should be aware of when having this type of meeting. First of all, the location of the meeting needs to be private, obviously, maybe in the manager's office. Another good point I picked up on was having a witness there to view the meeting. That could be someone from HR who's present in that meeting. And most importantly, you got to keep emotion out of it. Certainly, if it's an employee that's performance has been somewhat disappointing, or they've done something really wrong that's egregious, but you have to keep emotion out of it. And then you have to let them leave with dignity. Now, in terms of what HR, as I said earlier, how they can help with management, this has to be a cohesive process. Management really has to rely on HR throughout this process. But if it ever comes to the point of litigation, that needs to go, HR needs to handle that. And they need to step in with management and say, look, we got it from here. If they need to hire an investigating attorney, then the HR needs to handle that. And certainly, you get into all the legalities of representation. There's the what was called the Upjohn warning, letting employees know that any investigator was hired by the employer and is not there to represent the employee. And so those things need to be made clear. But again, that's really more why you hire the attorney, is to handle those types of things. Well, hopefully, as managers, we don't ever have to do this, but unfortunately, there will come a time and place that we probably will. So it's very important to use that HR resource as a key ingredient to helping us navigate these difficult waters.